All right, guys, Monty here, retired lawyer, active father, and today I want to talk about what to do during labor, delivery, and the immediate aftermath. Um, this may be a short video, I don't know, but the first part is kind of simple because there's not a whole lot for you to do during labor and delivery other than support mom and listen to her and the doctors and the nurses and do whatever they tell you to do. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version, is do whatever the hell the doctors and nurses and mom tell you to do. Um, uh, if beforehand you have a hospital stuff packed and ready to go, um, changes of clothes, toiletries, kind of a hospital bag. That would be a good thing to do. Um, Maybe install the car seat before the due date. If you can do that, that would be helpful. It's going to be a lot less nerve wracking than trying to install it with a newborn in your arms. But other than that, just be dad. Help mom get to the hospital. Take care of the hospital paperwork, take care of the other logistics, take care of everything else that you can possibly take care of so that she can focus on the incredible physical and emotional ordeal that she's going to be going through. Obviously, it's a miracle. It's a blessing. It's the most beautiful thing, but it's also an ordeal. She's going to be dealing with pain on a level that I don't think you and I can understand, and she's going to be dealing with contractions, and she's going to be out of sorts, I think. So it's your job to take care of basically everything else under the sun. Um, and it's really as simple as that. I know you may read or hear a lot about birth plans. Um, that's all good and well. My wife and I didn't really have a birth plan. I mean, we discussed it a little bit and we talked about whether to use an epidural, whether to use narcotic pain killing drugs. Um, but we knew we would go to a hospital and deliver the baby there. And my working assumption in this video is that you're going to do the same. I have no, other than just, if you're going to deliver at home or you're going to deliver in another setting outside of a hospital, if you're going to have a midwife in your home, for example, um, defer to those people. You've obviously chosen them for a reason, and they're there to guide you. So just take a back seat, Dad. Try to win the award for best supporting parent, supporting role, and just help mom get through it. And if you're at the hospital, then just listen to the doctors and nurses and do whatever they and mom tell you to do. If you have a birth plan, that's great. But I would say, also don't be too tied to a birth plan. I'm not poo-pooing the idea of birth plans. I just think that could potentially go out the window or be subject to modification very quickly. And it's important, above all, to just stay calm and be as helpful as you can be. Bring your A game to it. Keep your focus on mom and the baby, because it's not about you or me or us, right? It's about mom and the baby. And if something deviates from the birth plan, then you can't let it bother you too much, because at the end of the day, it's not so important that everything go according to your plan or mom's plan, even. The important thing is that she delivered this baby um, safely, and that the baby's healthy, and that you all get to go home and begin your journey together. So that would be a bit of advice I would impart to moms too. I think there's, um, people tend to feel like they need to, they have this perfect mental image of how they want the birth to take place and how they want to experience it. And you definitely have to be flexible. So that would be advice that I would give to moms and dads alike. But for your part, Dad, be flexible. Try to help mom be flexible and nimble, even if the birth plan goes out the window. Just focus on the baby and making sure that it's a successful birth. When should you go to the hospital? Talk to your prenatal doctor. As always, talk to the healthcare providers and professionals. One rule of thumb that you may come across is called the 511 rule. And we found that to be helpful and accurate. It seemed to apply to us, at least anyway. And what the 511 rule is or means is contractions that are 5 minutes apart, lasting for 1 minute, and that pattern persisting for an hour. So contractions 5 minutes apart, lasting a minute, and going for an hour or obviously more. False labor can be frustrating for people. The doctors and nurses will tell you it's not great to come too early to the hospital because it could be frustrating to be turned away or told that it's far too early and you need to come back. But if you see that the contractions are getting closer in time to each other, towards the 5 minute mark, and that they seem to be lasting for about a minute, obviously tending to increase in intensity from the onset, and that's continued on for about an hour, it's probably a good time to go to the hospital, or at least to call the hospital or your doctor and let them know what's up. But that 511 rule seemed to apply to us more or less. In fact, look, here's a copy of the birth or the contraction log that I filled out on that Saturday morning when we woke up, and my wife told me she thought it was time. We started keeping track at 7:32, and I will just tell you the contractions followed from 7:32. The next one was 6 minutes later, then 8 minutes later, then 6 minutes, then 4 minutes, then 5 minutes, then 6 minutes, then 8 minutes, then 5 minutes, then 5 minutes, then 5 minutes, then 4 minutes, then 5 minutes, then 5 minutes, then 4 minutes, which brought us to 8:48. And each of those sets of contractions were about a minute long. 1 minute 13 seconds, 56 seconds, 1 minute 15 seconds, 52 seconds, 35 seconds, 1 minute 1 second, 1 minute 10 seconds, 59 seconds, 44 seconds, 1 minute 10 seconds, 56 seconds, 56 seconds, 1 minute 25 seconds, 45 seconds, and 1 minute on the dot for the last set of contractions that took place at 8:48. And by that point, it had been over an hour since we started keeping track. You can see that it's not going to be exactly 5 minutes, but it's going to trend towards 5 minutes. You're going to see fewer 7 and 8 minutes and more 5 and 4 minutes. And they're all going to be kind of clustered around the 1 minute mark. And after an hour for us, we knew it was time to go. And we did. We got in the car and we went to the hospital. What about the immediate aftermath? Well, firstly, if your hospital endorses the idea of what they call a golden hour, where after the baby's born, they place the baby on mom's chest, or if she can't do that, they give the baby to you to hold. I'd encourage you to begin holding your baby and talking to your baby and nuzzling and cuddling with your baby right then and there. If they can put it on mom's chest, then that's great. They ought to do that. That first skin-to-skin contact, and even the first, the baby's first time being placed at the nipple, it's an incredible bonding experience. And it might be the beginning of kind of coaching your baby to latch onto the nipple and start nursing or sucking, breastfeeding, even if there's no milk coming in at that point. But it really begins in the first minute, or the first minutes anyway, where you get to hold your baby and talk to your baby. And you ought to do it as much as you can from the beginning. That may not be the priority because other things are happening. You may not even have the opportunity if they got to clean the baby up, and maybe the mom's going to get the first skin-to-skin contact time. But whenever the opportunity arises, you should take it, and you should look at it as the beginning of a time of holding and talking to your baby. Um, the first real thing I would do in terms of after you're discharged from the hospital and you get home, batten down the hatches. Batten down the hatches. What I mean by that is uh, put strict limits on the visitors that are going to come to the home. I would say batten down the hatches and basically create a cocoon and don't allow anybody into the home for the first few days, maybe longer, but at least I'd say 2 or 3 days. And this is increasingly becoming common advice in these types of circles, at least what I've heard. And I think it's for good reason because we're beginning to realize more and more that, the most important thing for new families in the first few days is just to kind of take a deep breath, slow things down, put all their focus and attention on the baby, and just get more comfortable with what's happening, get their arms around it, and reduce or eliminate all other external factors or distractions, because it's going to be hard enough and you're going to be running on adrenaline, which is good because you'll need it. I would eliminate non essential visitors. Maybe grandma's there to help. But other than that, take 2 or 3 days more if you like, and just stay in that nice cocoon in your home, enjoy the time with your newborn, and wait for things to settle down until you're at least a little more comfortable. I assure you, your adrenaline is going to be running very, very high, and it's all going to be brand new to you. Your baby's going to be brand new to the world, and you need some quiet time with just the three of you, or maybe four of you if there's a grandma, for example. I'm not telling you guys how to do it. I would just say reduce or absolutely eliminate non-essential personnel and no socializing. This is not the time to have friends over to see the baby. That's my opinion. You can follow it or not, but I think you are well served by batting down the hatches and keeping things as minimalist as possible in these first early days. The other thing I would do is wash your hands, and beginning that very day, get into the habit, make it a rule in the house that everybody washes their hands. The first thing you should do when you get home is wash your hands before you kiss your baby, before you kiss your wife. Wash your hands. Get everyone else in the house to do it too. Make sure anyone who does come over, the first thing they do before they touch the baby is wash their hands. The first 2 months in particular are a delicate and sensitive time for newborns, and contracting illnesses or infectious diseases in those first weeks and months is far more serious than after the first 2 months. And run it by your healthcare professionals and advisors. I'm sure they'll tell you the same. But it's a habit that we got into from the time my son was born. I wasn't a religious hand washer before I became a dad. I washed my hands as much as the next guy, I suppose, but it wasn't like I washed them 20 times a day. But from the day my son was born, especially when he was a baby, everybody that came in the house had to wash their hands first. And to this day, the first thing we do when we get home is wash our hands. When I pick them up from school, before we even leave the school grounds, we wash our hands. And, I can't prove to you how many times we would have gotten sick over the last 5, 6 years if we hadn't, but I don't have any doubt that it's helped keep us healthier, and less sick than we otherwise would have been. And it's especially important for newborn babies. The next thing you should think about, and I'll spend some time on this, is making sure that your baby feeds every 2 to 3 hours, which amounts to about 8 to 12 times a day. This is important beginning day one for 3 reasons. Number one, mom's breast milk will not come in for the first 3 to 4 days, give or take. In those first days, what her body will be producing instead is a substance called colostrum. And it's fascinating. You should talk to the doctors and nurses about it. It's really interesting stuff because they'll call colostrum liquid gold. It's like this concentrated superfood that not only provides all the hydration and nutrition that your newborn will need in those first couple days or so, but it's also chock full of antibodies and immune system starters, basically, that will power your newborn baby's body um, through the first week and beyond. It takes a very small amount to satiate a newborn in those days. Um, and your baby will be able to draw it from your mom's breast. And the nurses and staff at the hospital will probably help you with that before you get discharged anyway. Um, but that's one reason to make sure that every 2 to 2.5 hours in these first days of the immediate aftermath, and it's I guess you could say it's about 1 to 2 weeks is what we're talking about. Making sure that the baby is at the breast every 2 hours, every 2.5 hours. The first reason is to get that colostrum. Babies, when they're first born, they're going to be super, super alert and wide awake because they've just been through an intense ride, and their eyes will be fully open and they'll be able to lock eyes with you and stare into your soul. In pretty short order, they're going to get very, very sleepy, but it's going to be important to put them at the breast every 2 to 2.5 hours anyway, even if you have to wake them up. Um, so they can get the colostrum. The second reason you want to put the baby to the breast every 2 to 2.5 hours is for practice for breastfeeding. Like I said, mom's milk won't come in for a few days, but the body responds to that stimulus. The body begins to ramp up milk production, I think, with labor and delivery, but definitely when the baby is at the breast and is sucking. That even the skin to skin contact, the proximity of the baby to mom, and certainly latching onto the nipple in ways doctors can explain to you, but that kind of galvanizes or activates mom's milk production, and it helps her milk come in. Don't expect it to come in immediately, but getting into the habit now of putting the baby to the breast every 2 to 2.5 hours is good, because that's what your life is going to look like for the foreseeable future. We'll talk a lot more about this in the next episode when we dive fully into the fourth trimester. But what you're going to be looking at for the foreseeable future is essentially a 2.5 to 3 hour cycle where your baby feeds or nurses every 2.5 to 3 hours. It could be as little as 2 hours. It could be a little more than 3 hours, if as long as it doesn't go too much more than that, especially in the case of breastfed babies. But you're looking at 2 to 3 hours. And in the very beginning, it's okay to go 2 hours. Our hospital pamphlets even said 1.5 hours, which is fine in the beginning, and obviously do whatever the doctors and nurses tell you to do. I'm just saying that beyond the first 2 weeks into the fourth trimester, I don't think 2 hours is really where it's at. I think it's more 2.5 to 3 hours. So I would think about that. And the reason for that is that at the end of the day, many of the books will tell you 8 to 12 feedings a day. Well, if your baby is feeding 8 times a day, that totals, that's a feeding every 3 hours over a 24-hour cycle. If you're feeding every 2.5 hours, then that's 10 feedings a day. And if you're feeding every 2 hours, it's 12 feedings a day. So that's where the 8 to 12 feeding range comes into play. The reason why I think 2 hours isn't optimal is because when you factor in all the time it takes to breastfeed, feeding every 2 hours doesn't leave enough time for good full naps. And kind of to bottom line it for you, Dad, your goal essentially for the fourth trimester especially is full feedings and good naps. Say it to yourself again and again if you need to. It's the key. Full feedings and good naps. As mom's milk comes in, You want to make sure that your baby is getting full feedings, 15 to 20 minutes on each breast. You have to stop and take breaks to burp the baby, maybe more than once, maybe more than twice. You may have to stop to change the baby because it's got a wet diaper or a soiled diaper and it's crying for that reason. You may need to do that more than once. So breastfeeding can take something like 30 to 45 minutes, maybe even more than 45 minutes. And if you're feeding every 2 hours, which is timed or measured from the start of a feeding, then it doesn't leave enough time for an hour and a half long nap before the next feeding. And my research and information tells me that optimal naps for newborns and infants, more or less through the first year of life, through the first 2-3 years of life when he's napping, it should be about an hour and a half, or at least an hour to an hour and a half. What Weisbluth will tell you in his book, for example, is that a 45-minute nap may be sufficient. And it may be sufficient because the kid is going through a growth spurt and it wakes up early and needs to nurse more, and when the baby's going through a growth spurt, the feedings might be closer to 2 hours for a couple days. And the feedings may last more than 20 minutes on each side for a day or two because it's going through a growth spurt and it needs more breast milk. I lost my train of thought. Where was I with that? But generally speaking, it'll be 2.5 hours from the start of the first feeding to the start of the next feeding. And that's because, you factor in 30, 45 minutes for breastfeeding, maybe 15-minute cushion. Maybe it takes about an hour, and that still leaves enough time for the baby to nap. If it gets good naps, then it will wake up good and hungry and get a full feeding. And when it gets a full feeding, you're more likely to get good naps. And the more of those good cycles you can get over a 24-hour period, the healthier your baby will be, the more it will thrive, the more alert it will be, the faster you'll get to the point where you're kind of emerging from the fourth trimester. The wake time will begin to enlarge, and you'll just be better off in any number of ways. But for the first 2 weeks in the immediate aftermath, I'll stress that it is not important that you're a slave to any kind of rigid schedule. But I think everybody, including the doctors and nurses, will tell you, try to just get 8 to 12 good feedings over a 24-hour cycle in these first 2 weeks. Don't worry about the schedule so much, but it's still a helpful rule of thumb to kind of look at the clock and think, try to keep track if you can. I'm sure there's apps nowadays that electronically, on your phone and stuff, they can keep track faster and you can jot things down on a notepad, which is what we used. But try to keep track and try to abide by a 2 to 3 hour, 2.5 to 3 hour feeding cycle. Do it from the beginning to make sure you get the colostrum in the first 3 to 5 days. Do it from the beginning so that you're getting good practice for the breastfeeding and you're helping stimulate mom's milk production and you're helping the milk come in. And do it from the beginning because as mom's milk comes in, if you're nursing every 2.5 hours, or if you're at least putting the baby to the breast, if you're in the habit of doing that, then it will help to prevent engorgement of the breast, which is all of a sudden the milk is coming in. It's not being released because, the body was anticipating a feeding and maybe you didn't feed. Well, now mom's breasts are full of milk, and I don't know personally, but, women will tell you it could be uncomfortable. There could be pain and discomfort. It could be an obstacle, roadblock on the road or on the path towards successful breastfeeding. So those are at least 3 reasons why you want to put the baby to the breast every 2.5 or as little as 2 hours. And again, whatever the doctors and nurses tell you, but you want to start doing that from the beginning, even though mom's milk doesn't come in for a couple days. Um, Stay away from bottles and pacifiers. Stay away from them for at least the first 6 weeks, I think, is the medical advice, because that's around the time where uh, experts or folks feel like the breastfeeding has really taken hold. If you introduce pacifiers or bottles before then, it could cause nipple confusion for the baby, and then you'll have a harder time getting the baby to latch onto mom's nipple, because the pacifier or the bottle's nipple feels different and it confuses them. Um, don't worry about baths. Do whatever you want, but we did not bathe our son for at least 6 weeks after he was born. You don't need to. The only place they ever get dirty is on their butt, and you're changing diapers and wiping their butt with wet wipes, and you're keeping that area clean. You're probably not leaving the house so much, at least not if you're doing it the way we did it. Your baby doesn't need to see the world just yet. He's still getting used to what's right in front of his eyes. And babies can only see, you may not know this, but they can only really see about 7 to 14 inches in front of their face. 6 to 12 inches, 7 to 14. Different people, say slightly different things, but that's kind of the range. Closer than that, they can't see. Farther away, they really can't see. So just having you with them and staring lovingly into each other's eyes from a distance of approximately 1 foot, or having them take in the home as best they can, or just hearing your voice. I mean, in these early days, that's really all they need. The reality is there's not going to be a lot of wake time at all, because feeding time is going to be the newborn's wake time. Trust me on this. Take it to heart. It's one of the reasons you want to restrict visitors to the home, because baby doesn't have time for that. They don't have time for that. You're going to see that they're going to be falling asleep even when they're nursing. They got to sleep around the clock. Like I said in the last video or the video before that, even when you think they're awake, they're sleeping. So in at least the first 2 weeks, and I think some of the books will say even for the first 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, feed time is your wake time. Feeding, burping, changing, maybe singing one song. That's the wake time. And then you put the baby back in its bassinet on its back to nap. Think about that, because if you try to if you have a lot of folks in the home wanting to hold the baby, play with the baby, if you're taking them around to different places and doing all that, I just think it's a mistake, and I think you're better served the first couple weeks in the immediate aftermath of labor and delivery to just hunker down and kind of get comfortable with the basics of how you're gonna feed, burp, change, and put this baby down for a nap. I will add one thing at this point, which is you may want to watch for the first growth spurt at about 10 days. BabyWise says it takes place around the 10-day mark. I think our hospital said it was around 7 days. Let me share with you a story of something that we went through that really highlights the power of knowledge. I had read in BabyWise, this is remarkable, but BabyWise had said that newborns experience growth spurts approximately at 10 days, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months, and then again in 6 months. I read that. I forgot about it. It wasn't top of mind for me after the baby was born. And truth be told, that the 10-day growth spurt and the 3-week growth spurt even, I think went clear over our heads. I mean, we were feeding regularly every 2.5 to 3 hours. I think we were doing pretty well giving our son full feedings. And I just don't recall there being an issue about any kind of growth spurt or extra crying or extra hunger for the 10-day and the 3-week mark. But let me tell you, for at the 6 week mark, and it was almost 6 weeks to the day, and I remember that night like it was yesterday, our son was crying inconsolably in the afternoon. And we had gone 20 minutes on each breast, and he was still crying. And because we had fallen into and adopted a nice, stable routine by that point of these cycles of feeding, wake time, however minimal, and then sleep, we were able to eliminate some possibilities as to why he was crying. I knew, for example, that he couldn't be tired or overtired because he had gone up from a nap. It couldn't be that he's gassy because we were burping him. It couldn't be that he was uncomfortable in his diaper because we had changed it if it was wet or soiled. But he was still crying, and we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know if he was sick or if he was hurt. If it was too hot, too cold, we didn't know what it was, and we were starting to kind of freak out and panic, so much so that I Googled the nearest emergency room. I think it was late enough at night that we couldn't even go to the urgent care. We had to go to an emergency room if we were going to go anywhere, and the nearest emergency room was like a 20-30 minute drive away, which wasn't too far away, but it was far enough away that it gave us pause about whether we actually wanted to put the baby in the car seat, go to an emergency room in a hospital with a bunch of sick people and germs flying around and bright fluorescent lights and loud noises. Definitely wouldn't get good naps there. How long would we have to sit there and wait to be seen? All of this was kind of up in the air. But I'll tell you what, for however it happened, the thought popped into my mind, wait a second, this is like right around 6 weeks, and could it be a growth spurt? Something that I had read in one or more of these books months before. And sure enough, in hindsight, that's exactly what it was. We kept the baby on the breast. I think he went 25 minutes on each side. But then he was full and he stopped crying, and we avoided a trip to the emergency room, not in the middle of the night, but like late at night. And we were better off for it. And it's just amazing to me how these books were so accurate in essentially predicting that. I don't know if every single baby experiences growth spurts at those intervals, but it was spot on for us. And, the only way I could make sense of it is to realize that, man, these people, they know babies, they're experts in what they're talking about. And I'm really glad I read these books. You don't necessarily need to worry about the growth spurt at day 10, which is close to the end of the first 2-week period. Just be mindful if your baby's crying even more than he or she has the first several days. That might be why. Don't, panic. See if it is just that they need more breast milk because they're experiencing a growth spurt. Bottom line, we're going to talk a lot about structure, routines, rough schedules to keep an eye on. But in the immediate aftermath of birth, and for the first, say, 2 weeks or at least 1 week, feel more than free to not worry about schedules and the clock at all. In fact, even when you're on a 2.5 to 3 hour cycle later on, it's not about the clock, because no cycle is going to be, you might have cycles that are exactly 2.5 hours or 3 hours, but that's not the point. The point in that it's a rough approximation of how long it takes for your baby to get a good nap, absorb and digest the breast milk, wake up hungry again. And it's fairly accurate. But in the first week or two, don't worry about that. Do what the doctors and nurses tell you to do, which is probably going to be to make sure that your baby feeds 8 to 12 times over a 24-hour cycle. Shoot for 8 to 10, but 12 is permissible. 12 just isn't optimal as you go on. I can tell you for the first 4 or 5 days, we had a hard time keeping good records at all. It was right around day 5, and I kept meticulous records from as early on as I could, but it was right around day 5 where we were able to keep more regular notes of what was going on. And generally speaking, um, we were able to get our son about 8 feedings a day. Um, some days 9, occasionally 7, especially as weeks went on. But I was looking back at my notes. I was shocked to see how often it was 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8 feedings a day. Obviously, not all at the same time. The naps vary. The amount of time breastfeeding takes varies. Everything varies. But it's roughly a 2.5 to 3 hour cycle, which translates to 8 to 10 feedings over a 24-hour period. And it's wise to shoot for that. The closer you are to 8 as opposed to 12, I think it suggests to me that your baby's getting more full feedings. And like I said, these are opposite sides of the same coin. You get full feedings, you're going to get good naps. You get good naps, you're going to get full feedings. Rinse and repeat, and the cycle continues. The more good cycles you get, day in and day out, week in and week out, your baby's going to be more alert. Your baby's going to be healthier. Your baby's going to regain the weight that they lost in the first few days when they're not very hungry and they're very sleepy. Babies lose about, they say 7 to 8 ounces over the first couple days, 2-3 days, so that when they're discharged, they're lighter than when they're the weight that they were when they were first born. The objective over the first 2 weeks or so is to regain that weight. And if you commit to good full feedings and good lengthy naps, you're going to get there. And it's going to lay the foundation for your baby to really take to the breastfeeding successfully and sleep through the night faster than you can imagine. And we'll get to that in the next episode. For us, I'll just tell you, on day 5, it was 8 feedings, 15 minutes on each side for each of those feedings. On day 6, it was 15 to 20 minutes each side, and we got 8 feedings. On day 7, we got 9 feedings, 15 to 20 minutes each side. After the first few days, when mom's milk comes in, you should be looking for about 6 to 8 wet diapers a day. Some people say 5 to 7. 5 to 7, 6 to 8 wet diapers a day, 3 to 5 poopy diapers a day, 2 to 5. And if your baby's formula fed, it could be maybe fewer than that. But those are kind of the rough metrics to shoot for. And as far as sleep, honestly, brother, take it to heart. Look into it yourself. Think about it. Do your own homework and research. But they need to sleep around the clock. And in these first days and weeks, there shouldn't be any wake time at all, if you ask me. The baby still feels like it's in the womb. You need to try to create or mimic the conditions that obtained or prevailed in the womb, and let them sleep 15 to 19 hours or perhaps more, basically around the clock when they're not nursing. And I said this in the last video, I'll say it again. If, once mom's milk comes in and you're getting into the swing of things with the breastfeeding, you got to try to make sure they get full feeding. So that means waking them up in ways that I'll help you understand in the episodes to come. But just lightly stroking his face or tickling his feet until you get real clear, distinct signs that they are totally full, because they're absolutely refusing the nipple. But until then, they might fall asleep at the breast. It doesn't mean the feeding's over. If I could leave you with 1 or 2 things, besides battening down the hatches, no visitors, everybody washing their hands, the 2 things would be: try to get 8 to 10 or 8 to 12 good feedings a day, or good nursing sessions to help mom's milk come in. And let the baby sleep the rest of the time. I'll leave it there for now. Take care, and I'll see you next time.